Hello and welcome to the pre-Georgia-Clemson version of the Seth and Gentry show. This time with Smiling and Gentry Smile.
Yeah, just a lot more energy. We were kind of criticized for the lack of it in the last edition. I bought little party streamers and little noisemakers. It didn't really come off like I wanted, but
they don't actually make noise. It's the noisemakers.
No, we had them, but it was.
We can't even do that.
Not as festive as we really wanted,
but in our defense, it was the preseason. What exactly were we really going to talk about? We just weren't excited anymore. We were just ready to get it going, and now we have a game week. We have Chip Towers walking by us, grinning like an idiot. Photobomb! Chip Towers, everybody. Can't even get his whole head in the screen. We're not doing the Gentry and Chip and Seth show at this point. Let's get into
Ready for a game?
Yeah, there's a game. There's a game. Let's talk about a game. All right, I've broken this down a little bit, and Gentry, you and I have talked about this off camera. Let's talk a little bit on camera. You are a little bit more bullish on the idea that Georgia could win this game convincingly. Is that a fair way to put it?
A couple of scores, yeah.
No? Why?
Looking back over the last couple of years, teams that have beaten Georgia all share the fact that they've been able to control the line of scrimmage. Certain teams have either dominated Georgia up front or they've really controlled the game on the offensive and defensive lines. I don't think Clemson's going to be able to do that. The teams that have
They're small up front defensively.
The teams that have given Georgia the most trouble have been your South Carolinas and your Alabamas and your teams that are very physical and can stop the run and run the ball themselves. I'm not convinced Clemson can do either one of those things. Now, will they get yards? Will they score points? Yes. They're going to be a handful offensively. They're going to put Georgia in some adverse situations defensively that they're going to have to be able to overcome. And I think in some ways it'll be a shootout, but I just think Georgia's ability to win the battles up front and run the ball is going to make the difference.
I agree with you there. I think both teams are going to be able to pass the ball very, very well. Georgia's going to be able to run the ball. I just don't know how Clemson stops them. Now, can Clemson run the ball on Georgia just enough to keep them honest? That's the question. They don't have Andre Ellington anymore. Georgia, though, that front seven is just as inexperienced, pretty much, as the secondary. But you have a little bit more confidence in the depth that Georgia's going to be bringing in. To me, that's the key. If Georgia's defense can stop Clemson from establishing the run, then Todd Grantham and company can kind of really play back a little bit more. And they can flood the zone and concentrate on the pass a little bit more. And not only flood the zone passing, but they can send Jordan Jenkins, Leonard Floyd, and all those guys.
They can bring guys that know. Yeah. Down and distance has been a big thing for this defense for a long time. And I think some of their better performances last year were against teams like Florida, where Georgia was able to stop the run and get the down and distance and then just come after the quarterback.
Right.
Granted, Taj Boyd's a little better quarterback than what
which is why we're saying Clemson's going to score.
And they'll hit big plays. But in terms of driving the field consistently, we'll see. Clemson definitely has a scary offense, but I just don't see it across the board with them. I could be wrong. I definitely could, but I just think in this game, and also people talk about the home field advantage, but they're going to be making noise when Georgia has the ball. Georgia has a 4-year starter at quarterback.
I'm not sure it has much of an effect on Georgia's offense unless the offense is regressed or having 9 months off from playing football makes that much of a difference. But crowd noise isn't going to make I made this point in my mailbag. It's not going to make too much of an effect on this offense. These guys know each other so well. They know it's the same coordinator, same quarterback, same guys. They're going to be able to line up by osmosis.
I don't think they've been working with crowd noise. If they have, I
haven't heard it. We haven't heard it out there. We haven't heard them playing Tiger Rag, the way they played Sandstorm before South Carolina.
I'll ask you, we talked to some of these guys yesterday, and it seemed to me that it was a very loose, relaxed atmosphere.
Yeah.
They're not making too much of this.
I think the head coach is a little intense. Yelling at media members during practice is a little out of character.
He thought it was him. It wasn't.
It wasn't. I was about to... I wasn't having that. I don't want to do anything wrong.
Especially since you weren't holding the camera and you're a photographer.
Yeah. But I would say the players are loose, but I got to say, Gentry, I've kind of stopped after the South Carolina game trying to analyze too much how the players are in terms of their focus and approach and whatever, because a couple years ago before Boise State, it was, they're excited, blah, 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 and then Last year against South Carolina was the opposite. I really thought they were very even keel. They had a good business-like approach to the game, and then.
Yeah, but before that South Carolina game, you forget you had what happened to Michael Bennett on Tuesday, and when that happened, that just seemed to affect everyone. It was a bummer at a bad time. Anyway, in Boise 2 years ago, I mean, you got the sense they were up for that game. But
I think more important, this team has been through so many games like that now.
Well, and they've proved it to themselves that they're good enough to play at this level.
Yeah.
That Alabama game, and I know I keep harping on this, and obviously Georgia would have wanted to win the thing, but that game was valuable in so many ways for Georgia, just in how they played. And this is a confident group, especially on offense. Now, defense, there's still a lot of questions there, and I think they're as curious as anybody to see what's going to happen. But
here's the way I break it down. And this is very, very simplistic. I see Georgia offensively scoring on about 75% of its possessions. Clemson's offense being able to score on about 60% of its possessions, which is why then you introduce turnovers and special teams play as a factor. We're not even talking about Marshall Morgan.
In a first game, that always happens.
Yeah.
You will always see turnovers. You will always see special teams. Yeah.
So that's why I say it could really still go either way. But in my mind, I've kind of talked myself into the idea that Georgia should win because of the running game on both sides of the ball, but mainly Todd Gurley, Keith Marshall.
Well, and there's a lot of pressure on Georgia in this game, but there's even more pressure on Clemson in this game because there's a similarity between these two programs in the fact that they're both two teams that haven't taken that next step. And a lot of teams look at them as good enough to take that next step. Clemson's been here before. They've had, I remember, covering my previous beat covering Alabama. They played Alabama in 2008 in Atlanta. Clemson was a top 10 team coming into that season. They were favored to beat Alabama. Now, that was really the first game where Alabama kind of got it turned. But Clemson really wasn't that competitive in that game. They weren't competitive against Georgia in 2003. So I think they really do have a point to prove in this game playing at home.
If they win this game, it's 2 straight wins over the SEC. And that's huge.
And I think beating LSU was big for Clemson. That was a huge win for them.
You could argue how much LSU was really into that game, but Clemson won it. And so that they've got that going for them. And if Georgia doesn't win this game, it's another missed opportunity on a national stage. Whereas if they win it, it's a road top 10 win.
If they win it, you got to turn around and play South Carolina.
Yeah, but how much confidence is that then going for 1 week? Georgia has that respect that frankly they earned in the SEC championship game last year, and then built on, or at least reinforced by beating Nebraska.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves here, but if they do win that game, I think one of the biggest challenges of the entire season will be getting back down to play South Carolina, because that's the scary game.
Well, then we'll talk, again, we're not going to get ahead of ourselves too much, but then we'll talk to guys next week, and we'll talk to coaches about...
And let them win it
about
first
how
before
much,
we start talking about it.
But they'll talk about how much their approach has been this kind of 2-game kind of thing. I tried to talk a little bit about that with guys this week, but we really couldn't delve too much into it. It was more kind of focused on difference going into a big game to open the season the same way it was 2 years ago. But let's get back to the Clemson thing. We did not mention Marshall Morgan. We did not mention kicking. Rick is not going to announce until game. He's not going to announce.
Secret squirrel.
Yeah, secret squirrel. I say he's suspended based on people I've talked to.
I would be surprised if he's not.
Right.
Very surprised.
Do we think that's going to have a big effect? I mean, we don't know, but could it be?
Well, here's the thing. If Marshall Morgan, and look, he might have a great career at Georgia. I know there have been kickers in the past that didn't do real well the first year, but was he unbeatable at that spot anyway? I mean, let's say an Adam Erickson comes in and kicks a 50-yard field goal and does pretty well.
And by the way, I think Rick would let him try and do that early in the game.
Adam Erickson hit a
to throw Adam Erickson out there to try a long field goal, 50 yards or 45 to something. And if he doesn't make it, then all right, well then we're going to go for it from now on. But if he makes it, all of a sudden, what a confidence boost.
He made a 47-yard field goal at the G-Day a couple of years ago. That's really all I know about him kicking.
And here's the other thing. Here's the other thing. No matter what Rambo and Ogletree said after the fact last year, Rick has not let us talk to the kickers and specialists
at all,
which tells me they know what's up. So, assuming that Morgan is suspended, and Adam Erickson presumably, I've heard Colin Barber can get a shot too, or Patrick Belis, but whoever is going to be kicking knows. So they're not going to be surprised. So they've got that expectation going in too.
And along that note, I mean, do you really think that this would all be happening unless there was a suspension?
Right.
I mean, there's no reason to.
Yeah, I mean, we've delved into this. If a couple years ago, or not a couple years ago, last year, Brandon Smith, there was no suspension. Mark Richt didn't let him twist in the wind. He announced it.
That's right.
Let's just try and wrap this up quick as we can, Gentry. What else do you think kind of figures into this at all? The game, I mean, not Marshall Morgan's suspension.
I mean, it's going to be a lot of eyes on that defense, and I think Trey Matthews, as we sit here right now, should be able to play unless there's any more of a setback with his hamstring, and I think, that's big for Joe. I know people want to sit and say, oh, he didn't go through a lot of the preseason.
But he went through spring practice.
He did, and he's going to know enough of the defense. And to be honest, he's going to have Connor Norman out there next to him, and that right there is probably the biggest thing.
Yeah.
And
a guy who knows, Damian Swan and Connor Norman know the system, so they're going to be able to.
I understand people's hesitancy to want to get on board with that, with Connor Norman being a non-scholarship guy, and it has the feel of a last resort. But I'm going to tell you, if Josh Harvey-Clemens wasn't suspended and was still there to play that star role, I think Connor Norman would have been starting anyway.
I agree 100%.
And
Josh Harvey-Clemens would be at that star position, which Damian Swan could be playing.
They like having Norman out there with Matthews. It's
Yeah.
important because he can control a lot of the communication that would be two-headed in most cases.
The bottom line is, to get back to what we were saying earlier, this defense is going to get scored upon. Clemson's going to have some success, but I wrote about this today. I think a big part of the reason that Brendan Langley has moved to first-team cornerback and Shaq Wiggins is going to play too is those guys have made plays in scrimmages, and they're going to make a deal with the devil, this defense is, that maybe they'll give up 400, 500 yards, but they'll take that if there are 3 or 4 turnovers in the bunch. Brendan Langley and Shaq Wiggins are going to, and Damian Swan and company are going to be told, don't risk it so badly you get burnt for an 80-yard touchdown, but don't be afraid to go for it.
Well, and kind of tying this all up, giving up big plays is one thing. Getting consistently physically beaten all game is another. Mm-hmm. And again, the games Georgia's lost, they've been consistently
and if they do that on the line,
they've
they've got other guys to put in the game. They're going to play guys on the D-line.
And I think that's a big part of this, and I think Leonard Floyd's a big part of this. I'm really interested to see how they use him because I think there's going to be several ways they can do it.
It's just great that after an offseason of talk, particularly about defense, about who's going to do what, we now get to see it. And we don't get to see it against Buffalo. Not good for Georgia. They've got a game that's going to be a lot harder, but it's good for the rest of us because we get to find out right away.
Even for us, it's fun when the team you cover opens with the biggest game of the country in the first weekend, and players see that too. It helps the preseason. Everybody's a little more up for this than they would have in Buffalo, and that helps you not only in your first game but all through the season.
But it does mean you get inundated with calls that go on the radio, and you have to turn them down because, you know what? Not only do you not have the time, you want to devote your expertise to the Seth and Gentry
That's
show.
right. This is,
what
more do you want?
We just did. We'll talk to y'all next week to who knows what we're going to talk about. A win or a loss, and then we know we're going to talk about South Carolina, but who knows in what terms. See y'all then.